It was pouring that morning, the kind of cold, relentless downpour that makes the air itself heavy. Water lashed against my windshield in sideways sheets, the wipers groaning with every sweep as if they too were tired. I sat in the driver's seat, hands locked on the wheel, unable to move, staring at the gold-lettered sign of Whitman and Ellis Attorneys at Law. The building loomed between gray stone towers in downtown Boston, its windows glowing faintly against the storm. My name is Camille Bennett. I'm 37 years old, and today I'm walking my mother into the room where my grandmother's will is about to be read. Grandma Margaret Bennett died just 4 days ago. Even saying that in my head felt wrong, as if the syllables themselves might undo me. I had told myself I was ready. I had rehearsed calmness in the mirror, smoothing down the lapels of my Marine Corps dress blues, whispering steady words into my own reflection. But the truth, I didn't feel steady. I felt like a soldier about to step into a firefight without knowing where the shots would come from. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, and though I wore my uniform like armor, the rain had already found the seams, seeping into the fabric and clinging to me as if to drag me back into the car. "Camille," Mom said softly, her hand on my arm. Her fingers were trembling. "We don't have to do this." "Yes, we do," I whispered back. "For Grandma." That was the only reason I was here. Margaret Bennett wasn't my mother by blood, but in every way that counted, she had been the one to mother me. She had been the quiet listener, the steady presence when my marriage crumbled and my own father turned his back on me. She never raised her voice. She never judged. She just saw me. I finally pushed open the car door, the cold rain biting into my skin. My heels clicked against the slick concrete as I opened the umbrella and helped Mom out. The hem of my skirt grew heavy with water as we climbed the stone steps. That's when I saw him. My father, Richard Bennett. He stood under the wide overhang, not a drop of rain on his immaculate navy suit. His silver hair was combed back his tie, knotted with that same precision he'd always demanded from me when I was a girl. His expression was carved from marble, smooth-controlled, faintly amused. And then I saw her. Sierra James, 27, the Mistress. Not a hair out of place. A black dress that clung like a statement. Lipstick untouched by the storm. She stood at his side close enough that their shoulders brushed. In her arms, she held a swaddled newborn, tiny fists peeking out like punctuation marks. My stomach lurched. I had known. The late nights, the perfume that wasn't Mom's, the way he walked into rooms with a new cologne clinging to him. Knowing it in theory was one thing. Seeing it materialize in front of me in the rain with my mother at my side, that was another. Sierra leaned into him, tilting her head on his shoulder, as though this was a celebration, not the day we were burying Margaret's voice in legal documents. She smiled at me across the rain-slick marble, a smile too bright, too polished, edged with triumph. Dad's eyes met mine. No flinch. Just that same look he'd given me during the last year of my marriage, like I was noise background static he could turn down with a glance. He adjusted his cufflinks and tightened his smirk. I nearly turned around right there, nearly let the rain swallow me whole. But then I felt it. My grandmother's hand again, the memory of her fingers squeezing mine, her voice in my ear on a quiet spring afternoon. "You're stronger than you think, Camille." I tightened my grip on Mom's arm. She held her head high, though her lip quivered, though I could feel the fragility in her step. And together, without a word, to him or to her, we walked past. Past the smirk, past the baby she rocked like a prize, past the silence that pressed against our backs. The glass doors to the law firm sighed open. Warmth rushed over us, the faint smell of polished wood and brewing coffee washing out the rain. A receptionist in a gray blazer looked up, her voice, polite, practiced. "You're here for the Bennett estate." "Yes," I said, signing my name on the clipboard. My fingers felt stiff, but I wrote it clearly. Camille Bennett. No ex-wife, no former daughter-in-law, just me. "Right this way." The hallway was long and hushed carpet, thick underfoot sconces, casting amber pools of light on dark oak walls. It felt less like a place for grieving and more like a corridor leading to judgment. And maybe it was, because whatever waited behind those double doors wasn't just paperwork. It was a verdict on what Margaret's life and ours had meant. The assistant pushed open the doors and I stepped inside. The room was built to intimidate tall-backed leather chairs, mahogany table, stretching longer than any dining table in my childhood shelves of books no one had read in decades. The air was cool heavy with the scent of paper and polish. I chose a seat at one side of the table, back straight, palms folded. Mom sat beside me, her hand seeking mine under the table, fragile but firm. Across from us, Dad leaned back in his chair, one ankle resting casually across his knee, fingers tapping against polished wood. Sierra nestled beside him, that infant in her arms, her smile like glass catching light. "Camille," she said sweetly, tilting her head. "You look, well." I gave her nothing but a nod. The baby shifted in her arms, whimpering before settling again. For a heartbeat, I saw my younger self, the girl who once dreamed of holding a child of her own, of building a life that wasn't always about surviving someone else's shadow. That dream had died long before my marriage did. The door opened again. Mr. Harold Whitman entered with a leather briefcase, his silver glasses glinting under the chandelier. His voice was steady, low, carrying the weight of tradition. "Thank you all for coming," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. He placed a thick folder before him with the kind of care that suggested this was not just paper, but a loaded weapon. "Let us begin." And then just before he opened it, I saw it. A smaller envelope, cream-colored edges, worn my name written across the front in Grandma's unmistakable slanted script. The room hadn't noticed, but I had. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All I knew was that she had left me something she wanted everyone to hear, something she hadn't trusted anyone else to deliver. And in that moment, with rain still dripping from my uniform, I realized whatever was inside that envelope was about to change everything. The cream envelope sat on the edge of the mahogany table like a quiet witness. My name, Camille Bennett, inked in Grandma's careful cursive, seemed to glow under the chandelier's light. For a second, I wanted to reach across to take it before anyone else noticed. But my hand stayed still in my lap. Marines don't flinch. At least, that's what I told myself, though. My pulse thudded in my throat hard enough to drown out the rain still hammering the windows. The conference room was designed for intimidation. The carpet swallowed our footsteps. The oak shelves behind Mr. Whitman towered stuffed with leather-bound volumes that smelled faintly of dust and age, like the air in a church that had been locked too long. The table stretched like a runway, its glossy surface reflecting the chandelier's dim light in distorted ripples. I sat on one side with Mom, her small figure rigid beside me. She clutched her handbag in both hands, knuckles paling with the same tension I'd seen on her wedding day photographs. Across from us, my father settled into his chair as though it were a throne. He adjusted his cufflinks, his gold watch glinting every time the lightning flashed. He had a way of turning silence into a performance, a man who could make arrogance look effortless. Beside him, Sierra leaned forward, the baby swaddled in a white blanket against her chest. She wore that sly smile, half pity, half victory, like it was jewelry more precious than the emerald studs in her ears. Her eyes met mine. She tilted her chin, then whispered something to my father. He chuckled softly, lips curving into that familiar smirk, the same one he wore when he told me no daughter of his should be crawling in the mud with Marines. The same one he wore the night I left the house with my duffel bag and Mom's arms around me while he stood in the doorway and didn't say a word. I straightened in my chair, my boots pressed into the plush carpet like anchors. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat, the sound sharp against the heavy air. "We are here today for the formal reading of the last will and testament of Margaret Elizabeth Bennett." His voice was low, practiced as though he'd delivered 100 such readings before. He glanced at each of us in turn. Richard, Sierra, Mom, then me. His gaze lingered on me just a fraction longer than the others. Not pity, not curiosity. Something quieter. Recognition. Sierra broke the silence first. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her tone smooth, but just a little too quick. "I just want to clarify. Margaret made her wishes very clear to Richard. This shouldn't take long, right?" She adjusted the baby in her arms, letting the tiny head peek out from the blanket. The child stirred a small whimper, escaping. She rocked him with exaggerated gentleness, as if she were on stage. My father's hand slid over hers and squeezed. His other hand drummed against the table in that same controlled rhythm I remembered from his boardroom speeches. Mr. Whitman offered only a polite, unreadable smile. "Everything will be addressed in the will, Miss James." The way Sierra's smile tightened just slightly was enough to make me want to laugh. She wasn't used to being denied. Beside me, Mom's shoulders stiffened. She hadn't said a word since we walked in. She looked so small in her black dress, her silver hair pinned neatly, her face pale but composed. I felt her thumb rub across the back of my hand, back and forth the same way she had rubbed my hair when I was a child, afraid of thunderstorms. I turned slightly toward her. "It's okay," I whispered. She nodded once, but I saw her blink rapidly. Her voice never carried, never raised, but silence can be louder than shouting. The lawyer flipped open the folder. Pages whispered like dry leaves. Margaret Bennett was a woman of remarkable conviction. He began, his tone formal. "She prepared this document 6 weeks before her passing. It is legally binding and witnessed." My father gave a short, satisfied nod, as though 6 weeks ago was proof of his victory. But Mr. Whitman didn't continue right away. He paused, closed the folder halfway, and looked at us again. "Before I begin reading the allocations, Mrs. Bennett asked me to inform you that she left behind a sealed personal letter. It is to be read aloud after we have gone through the will in its entirety." The words dropped like stones into a pond. Sierra shifted her smile, faltering. Letter?" she asked. "Yes," Mr. Whitman said simply. He placed a hand on the cream envelope at his elbow, the one with my name. She was very clear. "It is to be read aloud in this room in your presence." The chandelier flickered. The rain pressed harder against the glass. I felt the envelope's weight without touching it. My name stared back at me, steady, unflinching. Grandma had always said she'd never waste her last words. Whatever was inside, she had saved it for this moment, for me, for Mom, for all of us. Dad's smirk twitched, faltered. For the first time since I stepped out of the car, I saw something behind his eyes. Not anger, not superiority, something else. Calculation. Worry, even. He shifted in his chair and crossed his arms. Sierra leaned closer, whispering, "It's nothing, just something sentimental. Don't let her get to you." Her tone was sharp enough to cut glass, but her hand trembled slightly against the baby's blanket. I kept my face still. Years in uniform had taught me how to stand at parade rest, how to let silence carry its own weight. I sat in that silence now, every breath deliberate, my gaze fixed on the table's polished wood. Because this wasn't just a will reading anymore. This was a reckoning. Mr. Whitman steadied the folder in both hands and began with the preface, "Every lawyer knows by heart the language measured, an old being of sound mind and disposing memory, revoking all prior wills, witnessed and notarized." The words tapped out a slow cadence against the hush, soft as rain on a tin roof. The chandelier hummed. The HVAC purred. Somewhere behind me, a clock ticked like a metronome, slow, insistent, drawing the room into its time. I let the legal rhythm pass over me and felt my breath settle into it. Inhale on the commas, exhale on the periods. Mom's hand found mine again under the table. She didn't squeeze. She just rested there, warm, present, alive like a small lighthouse in rough weather. Across from us, Dad perfected stillness. He leaned back, ankle across his knee, the picture of patient confidence, as if he had already read the ending and approved it. When Whitman said, "sound mind," Dad's mouth twitched in what he thought was a private smile. Sierra shifted, adjusting the silky scarf at her throat, letting its end slide through her fingers like proof she belonged here. The baby released a soft, squeaky sigh, and slept on face turned into her shoulder. The words marched on assets referenced in Schedule A, real property, described in Exhibit 1 financial accounts, enumerated by institution, and last four digits. Beacon Hill Home, Lakeside Cottage, investment accounts, jewelry, digital assets. It all sounded like boxes stacked in a storage unit labeled climate-controlled distant. Things that glittered but could not warm a room. I fixed my eyes on the folder and drifted somewhere else entirely. Back into Grandma's sunroom, spring afternoon light spilling across the braided rug in wide squares. She wore a cardigan the color of oat milk sleeves, pushed to the elbow wrists, fine as twigs. The steam rising from her chamomile made curtains in the air. On the low table, a blue and white tin that always meant ginger lemon cookies. "You look like you're trying not to breathe," she had said, pouring the tea. "That never works for very long." I'd laughed tight around the edges. I don't want to make a thing of it. Of what she'd asked, not letting me dodge, not offering an answer to fill my silence. Of how small I feel, I'd said. How small other people prefer me. She had stirred her tea once, twice. Then she looked at me in that way she had, like she was taking a photograph of my face and filing it in a folder marked Truth. "Darling," she said softly, "quiet and small are not the same. Some people know the difference. Some people like to pretend they don't." Now, in the conference room, legal language braided through the memory like a counter melody hereinafter set forth. Subject to encumbrances, executor to act without bond. The phrases were a net pulled taut. Somewhere in that net glowed the cream envelope with my name on it. Mr. Whitman went on liabilities satisfied before distribution charitable gifts already executed. In addition, he said, glancing over his glasses, "My client executed a memorandum regarding personal effects handwritten, dated and signed to accompany this will." Dad nodded again, the same practice nod he used in front of cameras. Sierra angled the baby so the blanket's edge showed the faintest embroidered crown. Detail for detail, she curated her place in the frame. I kept drifting, following the ribbon of Grandma's voice. Later afternoon, different day rain, like today's, but warmer April instead of November. I had arrived soaked at her door mascara, surrendered to weather and exhaustion. She had opened it without a question, placed a towel in my hands, and turned the kettle back on. "You don't have to explain to be welcome," she said, as if reciting a family rule I had missed. We ate grilled cheese, standing up at the counter, and watched of all things a documentary about glaciers. "They don't move to please anyone," she murmured, eyes on the slow blue mass easing forward. "They move when they must." And then, one morning, the whole map is different. Back to the table, to paper and pen and the smell of polish. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat delicately. Mom straightened. Dad's fingers tapped a new rhythm faster now, a tell he'd never admit. Sierra's smile thinned into a line. Pursuant to the residuary clause, Whitman read the remainder of the estate shall be distributed as provided in Section 5. His finger slid down the page. He paused. My heartbeat fumbled and then caught up. "Mr. Bennett," he said mildly. Looking up, "You'll recall we're proceeding section by section. I'll read allocations after the full overview is on the record." The correction wasn't sharp, but it landed. Dad's jaw worked once. "Of course," he said, as if he hadn't meant to lean forward, hadn't meant to preside. Mom's shoulders rose and fell. From the corner of my eye, I saw the slight tremor in her throat as she swallowed. There was a time in our house when swallowing was a language all its own. Swallow and smile, swallow, and step aside, swallow, and make room for his story. I tightened my grip around her hand. Whitman turned another page. Paper rasped. There is also a bequest memorandum directing that certain letters and personal journals be entrusted to a named recipient. The air changed. Sierra leaned over the table, to whom she said quickly, then pitched her voice higher, sweetening it with concern. "I mean only if this is appropriate to ask." Whitman didn't answer. He didn't need to. His gaze lowered to the envelope with my name as if to say, "You already know." He rested one palm on it, not possessive, just steady. His wedding band clicked softly against the table. I thought about the last phone call. It had come on a Tuesday, the kind of day that disappears if you don't mark it with anything. Grandma's voice thin but pointed. "If I write something down, you'll listen to it, won't you?" "I always listen to you," I'd said. There had been a small silence, then a good one, like the space between a question and the right answer. That's why she'd whispered. That's exactly why. Let the record reflect, Whitman said now, and his voice folded the day. Back into the room that the sealed letter will be read after all provisions are disclosed. Dad exhaled through his nose, a sound like restraint scuffing its shoes. "Margaret never liked theatrics," he said lightly. "She was a woman of order." "She was," Whitman replied, not looking at him. "Which is why we will honor her order of operations." The rain ratcheted up a notch, slanting against the glass. The baby stirred and released a soft, uncertain sigh. Sierra jostled him, eyes pinched bright. I watched the way she touched Dad's sleeve with her free hand, a touch that said, "We have this." Performers never believe the audience can see behind the curtain. Grandma had always seen, not by chasing drama, but by refusing to pretend it wasn't there. I rolled my shoulders back. The collar of my uniform had long since dried against my neck. Heat from the vent above warmed the damp thread by thread. I thought of the way Grandma would set her teacup down with care, never clattering, as if noise were a debt she refused to incur. Quiet and small are not the same. I held the sentence in my mouth and let it dissolve like sugar. Whitman's pen scratched notes in the margin. The click of the nib returning to its cap sounded almost ceremonial. "We'll proceed to allocations next," he said. Dad's smile returned just a shade too eager. Sierra sat up straighter, scarf catching the light, and widened her smile to include pity. Mom's fingers tightened once on mine, then smoothed again, palm soft, pulse steady. I looked at my name on the envelope and felt something loosen, then settle. Not hope, not fear. The simple truth that the woman who had known me best had chosen her last words with care. She had asked the law to speak so that no one could argue the terms, and then she had saved herself for the line no one could interrupt. She left the law to speak first, and herself to speak last. Mr. Whitman drew in a breath that whistled faintly at the end. He spread the papers across the mahogany like a general laying out a battle map. His voice was measured steady, almost hypnotic, as he began. "To my beloved son, Richard James Bennett," he read, "I leave the portrait of his late father, currently displayed in the study of my Boston home." The words slid through the room like a blade wrapped in velvet. For a moment, I thought Dad hadn't heard them. He blinked, then leaned forward, jaw flexing. The portrait he repeated as if the word itself was beneath him. Sierra's head jerked toward him, her smile faltering. She glanced at the infant, then at the attorney. "Surely," she said, voice pitched sweet and high. "Surely, that's not all." Whitman didn't flinch. "We'll continue." The clock ticked. The rain hammered harder. "To Miss Sierra James," he went on, eyes never leaving the page, "no specific bequest is made." Sierra's fingers froze around the baby's blanket. For the first time since I arrived, she didn't smile. Her lips parted, then pressed together gloss, catching the light in a thin, trembling line. Dad's hand twitched on the table. He made a sound in his throat, something halfway between a cough and a growl. Whitman turned another page. The rasp of paper sounded like a gavel strike. And to Camille Ann Bennett, he said clearly, voice carrying across the heavy silence, "I leave the entirety of my estate." The words didn't land at first. They hovered in the air, weightless like feathers that hadn't yet realized they were bricks. My father's chair screeched back as he straightened, eyes flashing. "Excuse me!" His voice cracked sharp against the walls. "Read that again!" Whitman, unruffled, adjusted his glasses. "To Camille Ann Bennett, I leave the entirety of my estate. This includes the residence at Beacon Hill, the lakeside cottage in Vermont, all investment accounts, all heirloom jewelry, and any remaining physical or digital assets." My heart thudded in my chest. I sat frozen, my hand still wrapped around Mom's. Her breath caught, and for a moment she squeezed me so tight it hurt. Across from us, Sierra's face drained of color. She looked at the baby, then back at Richard, her eyes flashing like a warning flare. "This is absurd," Dad snapped. His voice, once so smooth, had gone jagged. "Margaret would never. She knew her duty. She knew this family is mine to carry forward." Whitman closed the folder gently. His calmness made Dad's anger seem louder, uglier. This document was signed and notarized 6 weeks prior to her passing. It was executed in accordance with Massachusetts law. I have the witnesses' certifications here if you wish to see them. Dad's jaw clenched so tightly the tendons stood out like ropes. She must have been confused. "She was not?" Whitman said, his tone edged with steel. Sierra broke in, then her voice rising in brittle protest. "No, she can't do that. She told me that Logan would inherit. She said the family name had to carry on." She jostled the baby forward, almost presenting him like evidence. She said she wanted her great-grandson to have security. Whitman's gaze flicked to the child, then back to the paper. The will makes no mention of an heir by that description. The contingency clause is clear. Should Mrs. Bennett decline the inheritance, all assets will transfer to the Willow Creek Literacy Foundation. The name stunned me. Willow Creek. Grandma's childhood town. The place she once whispered about during a snowstorm, her voice full of longing. Sierra's mouth fell open. So either she, her eyes cut sharp toward me, takes it, or it all goes to some library. "It is a foundation for literacy," Whitman corrected gently. Dad shot up from his chair, fists clenched at his sides. "This is unacceptable. My mother would never choose." "She did," Whitman said, cutting him off for the first time. "And she chose clearly. The document bears her signature. Dated. Witnessed. It will stand." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was brimming thick with the sound of Dad's unraveling composure, the baby's tiny breath, the rain striking the glass like applause. I kept my eyes on the envelope with my name. It sat untouched, patient waiting. Mom's shoulders began to shake. At first, I thought it was the wet fabric of her dress clinging to her skin. But then, I heard it, the sound I had been holding back myself, the sharp hitch of a sob. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her whole body bending forward, as if the weight of decades had finally broken loose. She broke down. The room shifted. Not because of Dad's anger or Sierra's glare, but because my mother, silent, patient, endlessly enduring, was crying, and everyone could see it. I slipped an arm around her shoulders and held her close. She buried her face against me, her tears hot through the wool of my sleeve. I didn't try to hush her. I didn't tell her to be strong. I let her cry because for once, she didn't have to be the one swallowing silence. Across the table, Sierra froze mid-bounce, the baby's whimpering echoing her own shallow breaths. Dad's face turned a dangerous shade of red. His lips pressed so tight they seemed to vanish. Whitman waited. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He let it bloom heavy, undeniable. His hand rested once more on the cream envelope. "This," he said softly, "is where Mrs. Bennett's voice will be heard." I looked down at my name written in her steady script. And for the first time in years, I felt the air in my chest loosen, as if the storm outside had cracked something open. This wasn't about money, it was about truth. And the truth was about to stand up and speak. Mr. Whitman set a glass of water by my mother's elbow, then slid the opener beneath the cream flap. The tear was soft and final. One thick page unfolded. The ink was the deep blue my grandmother used on recipe cards. He began, "To my dearest Camille." Mom's breath hitched. Sierra's smile flattened. My father's chair creaked, then went still. "If you're hearing this, I'm in the sunroom in my mind shawl on chamomile, in the good china I never saved for special days. I picture your hands folded the way you do when you decide not to tremble. I know that look. I wore it once. I'll be plain. I did not do what I did to hurt Richard. I did it because I can no longer protect a version of him that only lived in my hope. He chose charm over honesty, control over kindness, performance over truth. That broke my heart. Hearts survive their own breaking. Dad exhaled through his nose the old tell when the script wasn't his. As for you, Camille, quiet is not the same as small. When you stood in my doorway with rain on your lashes, apologizing for taking up space, I saw a woman who had learned to live in other people's weather. I wanted for once to give you a roof of your own. You never asked for anything. Money favors, promises to rewrite anyone else's story. You brought tea when I was tired and silence when I needed it. You peeled apples in one ribbon the way my mother taught me. So I decided not to reward you, but to free you. Sierra looked down at the baby, then up again, blinking fast. I know about evenings in a house where your name had to ask permission to be spoken. I know about the perfume that wasn't yours, and the trips explained with a smile, as if that were enough. I know you were called dramatic for noticing. I am old enough to say what younger women are punished for saying it was not in your head. I also know you kept your dignity. You didn't weaponize your wounds. You worked. You noticed gentleness. I trust that more than anything, I could leave you. Whitman let the cadence breathe. Richard, if you are listening and you are here, is a final gift that is not an object. Charm is not character. Applause is not love. Control is not care. A mother cannot make a man out of years. He refuses. My father kept his eyes on the glossy wood. There is a portrait of your father in the study. You have always liked how it looks. Take it. It belongs with you. As for the rest, I am putting it in the hands that never asked. If Camille declines, it will go to the library that raised me when money didn't. Willow Creek Literacy Foundation. That building kept me company when my house felt too small. It will keep other girls company after we're dust. Camille houses and accounts are poor substitutes for courage, but sometimes they buy time, and time is the currency of becoming. Use it. Waste none of it convincing people who are busy being unconvinced. Spend it on building on quiet, on friendship that survives an empty room. Paper is only as brave as the hands that carry it. Carry this well. Not for me, for yourself. My mother bowed her head and let go. I held her shoulders and let her cry. No shushing, no be strong. Whitman read the final paragraphs. You will be tempted to apologize as you choose. Don't. The people who love you won't require a receipt. Keep those people. The rest will wander off when your boundaries stop feeding them. When your father tells a story about legacy, remember legacy is a verb. Being believed is a form of shelter. You may insist on it. I ask that this be read aloud because I have watched the truth get negotiated into something polite. Consider this my last impoliteness and my best manners. I loved you, Richard, as mothers love their sons. I am not withdrawing that love. I am refusing to mortgage anyone else's life to it. And you, Camille, there's a pie recipe behind the flour in the second cabinet. It isn't very good. Add more butter. Don't be stingy with cinnamon. Serve it warm to someone who had a long day. If no one has, serve it to yourself. Don't keep my teacups on a shelf. Drink from them. Let them chip. That is how you know a thing has lived. Quiet women carry heavy truths. Set them down where they can rest. Yours unabashed, unafraid. Margaret. No one applauded. The rain eased from fury to endurance. My mother wiped her cheeks and let out a tiny laugh tucked inside a sob, the sound you make when a verdict finally fits. Across the table, Sierra tried to reassemble her face. The baby fussed. My father did not look up. Mrs. Bennet asked that this be given to you, Mr. Whitman said, and held out the page. I took it with both hands. The paper was warm. I slid it into the envelope and felt its weight small enough to misplace, heavy enough to anchor a life. Dad rose, voice raw. This is theater. It is a will, Whitman said, courteous and immovable. And a letter. Sierra found her bite again. You won't get away with this, she said to me, brittle. We'll contest. You can try, I said. You'll lose. It didn't thrill me to say it. It felt like setting a fragile thing back where it belonged. Mom turned her damp face up to mine. She saw you, she whispered. She saw us. I know, I said. The knowing arrived like a lamp turning on in a familiar room you've only ever walked through in the dark. Whitman squared the stack and capped his pen. Unless there are process questions, He said, "We are concluded." No one spoke. Sierra stood so fast her chair scraped. The baby cried. She flinched, then threw my father a look edged with blame. He reached for her elbow. She shrugged him off. They left without looking back. The door side closed. In the quiet, the rain thinned to a silver veil. I tucked the envelope into my bag and stood knees steady. I offered Mom my arm. She took it not because she was weak, but because the day had asked her to be carried for once. At the threshold, I looked back the long table, the high chairs, the shelf of books. No one reads the place, where a kind woman's last words had made a room remember itself. For other families tomorrow, it would be just another appointment. For us, the deciding was over. The truth had stood up and kept its feet. Outside, the air smelled of wet stone. I opened the umbrella and tilted it over my mother. We stepped into rain that finally felt like ours. The umbrella rattled in the wind, but Mom didn't seem to notice. She clutched my arm like it was the only solid thing in a world that had just shifted under her feet. Her tears mingled with the rain on her cheeks, and I realized she wasn't trying to hide them anymore. For once, she didn't apologize for crying. I walked her to the car, opened the door, and helped her inside. She sat silently, hands folded over her purse eyes, staring at the gray blur of traffic. I waited for words, but none came. So I started the engine, and we drove away from the granite facade of Whitman and Ellis without looking back. Boston's streets were slick rivers of light headlights dragging across the asphalt like broken glass neon signs, bleeding red into puddles. I drove slowly, hands steady on the wheel, though every muscle in me was still vibrating with the echo of Grandma's letter. Her voice lingered in my chest. Quiet women carry heavy truths. Set them down where they can rest. For 37 years, I had carried silence. For 37 years, I had been the daughter who never measured up to my father's vision of perfection. He wanted sons. He got me. And no matter what I achieved, the early mornings at Paris Island, the sweat that stung my eyes on the rifle range, the medals pinned to my chest. He saw only failure because it didn't look like him. Tonight, that weight had been set down. Still, as I pulled into Mom's driveway, headlights sweeping across the wet siding, I saw the way her shoulders curled inward. Justice for me had come with a price for her. She had lost a mother, and in one breath, she had lost the last illusion about her husband. "Mom," I said gently. She looked at me, eyes rimmed red, but shining with something fiercer. "She gave it to you," she whispered. "She gave you everything." I shook my head. "She gave me a chance. But I'm not taking it away from you. Half of this belongs to you, Mom. She wanted you to have peace, too." Her mouth trembled. "Camille, I don't want anything but to know she saw me. All these years I thought, maybe I was the fool." "You weren't," I said. "You stayed. That takes its own kind of strength." We sat in silence, then the rain softening against the roof, the dashboard lights painting her face in muted gold. It wasn't the silence of dismissal I'd grown up with. It was the silence of shared survival. The days after blurred together. Calls from real estate agents, certified letters with embossed seals, numbers that didn't feel real. I worked through them like I worked through field manuals, page after page, check the box, sign the line. The Beacon Hill house sold first. Buyers fought over its address, not its warmth. I let them. The money hit my account numbers, stacking higher than I'd ever imagined. I wired half of it to Mom without ceremony, just a line in the memo. "For the years you held me up." She called me that night, voice shaking. "Camille, it's too much." "It's not enough," I said. "It's just paper. You taught me how to survive him. Grandma taught me how to live. You earned every cent of this as much as I did." She went quiet, but I could hear her breath again, steady now. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Those 4 words landed heavier than all the legal clauses Whitman had read. But storms don't vanish. They linger on the horizon. 3 days after the will reading, I was restocking supplies at my apartment when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find my father standing there. No umbrella this time, just a damp suit and hair flattened by the drizzle. He looked smaller. His posture slouched, the polish stripped away. "Camille," he said, voice low, almost gentle. I didn't step aside. "What do you want?" He shifted hands, shoved into his coat pockets. "We need to talk." "We don't," I said. His jaw flexed. I didn't know she would do that. I didn't know she'd leave it all to you. To you of all people." I raised an eyebrow. "Why not me?" "Because you're not—" He stopped. His throat worked. "You're not family anymore." The word landed like a stone, but this time it didn't bruise. It simply fell harmless to the floor between us. "She didn't see it that way," I said. His eyes narrowed, a flash of the old temper. "You'll give it back. You'll do the right thing." I shook my head. "The right thing? You mean hand it over so you can parade it around at golf clubs and board meetings so she can raise her child in someone else's house, while mom sells her wedding china to pay the bills?" He flinched, his mouth opened, then shut again. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I understand perfectly," I said. "I understand you made your choices, and now you get to live with them." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I don't have anything left, Camille. The business is failing. Sierra's gone to Austin. She took the baby. His voice cracked raw. "She doesn't even answer my calls." For a flicker of a second, I saw the man I once believed, in the man I once called Dad. His shoulders slumped, his eyes were hollow, his watch gone from his wrist. "You have something left," I said quietly. His gaze lifted, almost hopeful. "You have the life you built," I said. "You have consequences." He blinked, as if I had struck him harder than any drill instructor ever could. "Camille, please," he whispered. "I don't want anything. I wanted to see if you still cared." I shook my head. A tired laugh scraped out of me. "The woman who used to beg for your approval, she's gone. She died the night you looked me in the eye and called me an embarrassment for wearing this uniform." I touched the edge of my collar, the gold anchor that still glinted even in the gray light. "You don't get her back. You don't get me back." The rain fell steady around us. Behind me, Mom's lamp glowed warm through the curtains. Behind him, the streetlight buzzed, flickering faintly. Two different worlds, only a few steps apart. "I don't know who I am without you," he admitted at last. I opened the door wider. The wind carried in a breath of wet leaves and asphalt. "That's not my problem," I said softly. "That's your work to do." He lingered on the threshold, waiting for me to waver, for me to soften. When I didn't, he nodded once. Not with triumph this time, not with control, just defeat. Then he turned and walked into the rain. I closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled. For years, I had believed healing would come when he finally apologized. But as the quiet settled around me, I realized I didn't need his words. His absence was enough. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment. Official seals. Heavy paper. The estate transfer. I set it on the counter and left it there for hours, the weight of it bending the wood slightly. I walked around it, made coffee, folded laundry, stared out the window at the city lights. It wasn't fear of what was inside. It was fear of what it meant if I opened it, fear of freedom. Because once I signed those pages, I couldn't pretend anymore that I was still waiting for someone else to give me permission. Finally, as night slid in and the city quieted, I slit the envelope open. The papers whispered as they spilled out deeds, titles, bank statements, all signed in Grandma's firm, unshaking hand. She had planned everything down to the ink she used. I skimmed the numbers, the addresses, the fine print. It all felt unreal. Then my eyes snagged on a single line. Property, 114 Maple Street, Willow Creek. To Camille Ann Bennett. Willow Creek. The name itself felt like a key. Grandma's stories of summers by the river, of walking barefoot down Main Street, of the little library, where she first learned to read by lamplight. It was the only place I felt like myself, she had told me once. She never went back, but she had left the chance for me to go. I sat down at the kitchen table. Papers spread before me and whispered into the silence. "You planned this, didn't you?" The quiet didn't answer. It didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission. The papers on the table were heavy with signatures and legalese, but they were also heavy with something else possibility. The kind Grandma had whispered about over tea, her words threading through my memory like steam. Sometimes, darling, you have to start small. That's how you find yourself again. I didn't keep everything. I couldn't. The Boston townhouse sold within weeks, snapped up for a number I couldn't wrap my head around. I split the money right down the middle. Half went to Mom, who tried to refuse until I reminded her that for 40 years she'd kept a roof over our heads while Dad collected accolades and mistresses. She cried when the funds cleared, sitting at the kitchen table with her bank statement glowing on the screen. It's like she gave me back time, she whispered. The other half? Well, that was my decision. Margaret had planted the seed with her letter, the mention of Willow Creek, and its small-town library that once kept her safe. She had given me the house there too, a weathered old place near the lake, tucked between pine trees. When I drove up for the first time in years, the air was different, lighter, freer. The streets had one blinking stoplight, and the diner still smelled of bacon grease and coffee. Across from a shuttered post office and a bakery that only opened on Sundays, I found it a dusty old storefront with peeling paint and a faded sign that once read, "Books and Brews." I walked past it twice before stopping the third time. Rainwater dripped from the awning, catching the late afternoon sun, scattering light like broken glass across the cracked sidewalk. I pressed my palm against the cool window, peered in at the emptiness, the bare shelves, the sagging floorboards, the faint outline of where a counter once stood. Most people would have seen ruin. But standing there, damp uniform collar still brushing my neck, I saw something else. I saw space. A room waiting to matter again. I called the number on the for sale sign. A man named Wayne Holloway picked up his voice, surprised that anyone was interested. That place, he asked, hasn't been touched since before the pandemic. Roof leaks. Floor needs work. Honestly, it's more headache than home. I'll take it, I said. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Lady, you don't even want to see an inspection report first. I've seen it, I said. I know what it is. By the end of the week, it was mine. No fanfare, no grand contracts, just a handshake in a diner booth over coffee, a signature on a thin sheet of paper, and the quiet thrum in my chest that said, "This is yours." The first days were nothing glamorous. I wore old jeans and a faded sweatshirt, hair tied up, hands blistered from scrubbing and sanding. I tore out rotting shelves, swept away cobwebs, patched cracks in the plaster with clumsy strokes that left smudges on my arms. I painted the walls a warm, honey shade, the kind that turned morning light into something that felt like it could hold you. When the old floorboards threatened to splinter under my boots, Wayne introduced me to Jacob, a local carpenter who smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. He was quiet, respectful, and he didn't flinch at the work. Together, we hauled planks of reclaimed barnwood, sanded them down until our arms ached, and built a counter that looked like it had already lived 100 lives. You sure about the name? He asked one afternoon, running a calloused hand over the smooth wood. Yeah, I said. The Hearth. He raised a brow. Not Books and Brews. That's what everyone knows it as. I shook my head. The Hearth isn't about what you sell. It's about what you give. Warmth. Belonging. A place to rest. He studied me for a moment, then smiled. That's a good kind of place. The menu came later. I didn't want fancy pastries that looked better than they tasted. I wanted something real, something that carried memory in every bite. So I started with Grandma's recipe cards. The handwriting was slanted but sharp, the ink faded but steady. One card, nearly translucent from years of flour dust, caught my eye. Orange zest muffins. Double batch. Add a pinch of clove, trust me. I baked them 4 times before I got it right. The first batch was dry, the second too sweet, the third collapsed in the middle. But the fourth was perfect. Golden fragrant steam curling upward like a blessing. I broke one open, the citrus rising with the heat cinnamon threading through. I took a bite and felt my throat close. Not from sadness, from gratitude. Grandma would have told me the crust needed more butter, and then she would have hugged me anyway. On opening day, there was no ribbon cutting, no speeches, no cameras. Just a hand-painted sign that read, "Open," a brass bell above the door that chimed like memory, and me in a flour-dusted apron behind the counter. My first customers were two sisters in their 70s. They ordered Earl Grey and split a slice of pie. "You make this one of them?" asked, squinting at me over her glasses. "Yes," I said. She took another bite, closed her eyes. "Tastes like something worth staying for." The next day, a nurse on the night shift came in, still in scrubs, asking for coffee and 2 scones, one for now, one for later. A teenager with tired eyes settled into a corner booth with calculus homework, stirring whipped cream into his cocoa. A grandfather brought in his granddaughter after ballet, letting her choose 2 cookies, one to eat right away, one to save for tomorrow. They didn't ask me who I used to be. They only saw who I was now, a woman with flour on her sleeves, moving with a rhythm that belonged to no one but herself. It was a Thursday morning when he came. The sky was gray mist hanging low like breath against the windows. I was polishing the glass when I saw him across the street. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but then he stepped forward, shoulders, slumped hair, unkempt. "Dad?" No polished suit, no smirk. Just a man stripped of his stage. He paused on the sidewalk, uncertain, before crossing. The bell chimed as he entered, and the customers fell silent, sensing the weight that followed him. He looked around at the honey-colored walls, the mismatched chairs, the quiet tables filled with strangers who weren't strangers anymore. His voice cracked low. "You did all this?" "Yes," I said. My tone was even. "It's beautiful," he murmured. His hands shook as he shoved them deeper into his pockets. "Camille? I'm sorry." I stayed behind the counter, steady. "That's not what this place is for," I said. His eyes darted. "I've lost everything. The business, the house, Sierra, she's gone. Took the baby to Texas. I haven't heard from them in months." He swallowed hard. "I don't know who I am without all of it." I stepped around the counter close enough to see the lines etched deeper into his face. His eyes searched mine, desperate. "You still have something," I said. "What?" he asked, voice raw. "Consequences." He flinched like the word had teeth. His mouth opened, then closed again. For once, there was no speech, no smirk, no script. Only silence. He lingered, hoping for a lifeline. I didn't throw one. Marines don't rescue men who set fire to their own ships. Finally, he turned and left. The bell above the door rang once, sharp and final. That evening, I stood in the kitchen of the hearth apron, dusted white-orange zest brightening the air. Mom sat at a table near the window, reading one of Grandma's old novels, her glasses slipping down her nose. I set a warm muffin in front of her. "More butter this time," I said with a smile. She broke it open, steam curling upward, and laughed through her tears. She'd be proud. I believed her. For once, I believed it myself. If Camille's journey touched you, take a moment tonight to reflect on your own story. Have you ever had to choose yourself even when it cost you everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more stories of resilience, dignity, and quiet strength, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe and join me again. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply to choose ourselves.